I'd like to offer a prayer for Wendy Marlowe. Loving and eternal God, we come before you with gratitude for the life of Wendy Marlowe, who served this borough with dedication and care. We thank you for her contributions to our community, the legacy she leaves behind, and the lives she touched during her time among us. We pray that you bring comfort to all who grieve her loss, her family, friends, and colleagues. And may Wendy rest in peace, and may your peace dwell in the hearts of all who mourn her. Amen. I would like to offer a prayer for the work of this council. Almighty God, you gather tonight as elected representatives of this borough, mindful of the responsibilities entrusted to you by its residents. God grant you wisdom in your decision-making, clarity in your discussions, and unity in your purpose. May God help you to act with integrity, compassion, and fairness as you seek to serve the common good. God, bless those efforts tonight and guide each councillor to make choices that reflect your justice, mercy, and peace. And may all that we do honor the trust placed in us and contribute to the flourishing of this community. Amen.
I reserve my right, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are none.
In relation to the notice of motion, freedom of the borough for key workers, just to state that at that time, I was one of the key workers working through the pandemic.
I was going to say exactly the same and suggest that most of us in this room were probably key workers in one way or another. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. March 2025 will be the 5th anniversary of the first COVID lockdown. COVID killed 230,000 UK civilians. That's, I think, 3 times more than the 2 World War deaths of civilians in the last century, and I believe it's higher than the Spanish flu of the sort of 1918s. We all experienced lockdown. It affected our communities deeply, and during this time there was a huge amount of anxiety, sadness and loss. It was the key workers from the public sector, the private sector and the voluntary sector that kept working and kept people alive. The UK government has defined key workers, and the ones that were critical to the COVID response. In order to give the freedom of the borough, I've divided those key workers into 3 sectors, because we have to give the freedom of the borough to either people or organisations. And I've hopefully chosen 3 organisations, one to represent each of those sectors. That's purely representative because I want to make sure that we absolutely honour everybody who was contributing to that effort. So the 3 sectors, public sector obviously included the NHS, primary, secondary, acute, mental health, etc., and social care, education, childcare, police, defence, justice, fire and rescue, local and national government, and parish councils, don't forget parish councils, waste collection, disposal, public safety and national security, public service broadcasting, transport and other key public services. We couldn't have done without those. The voluntary sector, I mean, this is just huge and varied, too huge and varied to list everyone, but clearly people working in health and social care and community support were right at that front. Private sector includes people in the growing industry, production, sale and distribution of food and other goods. We can all remember the huge surge in deliveries that happened. Let's not forget the vets, transport services, utilities, energy clearly needed to carry on, communications, water and financial services. Key workers therefore covered all those sectors, the public, the private and voluntary sectors. So, as I said, it felt reasonable to suggest that a representative from each of those accept the award on behalf of all organisations and workers within their sector. So I therefore move that this council resolves that agreement be given in principle that pursuant to section 249 of the Local Government Act of 1972 on behalf of Maidstone's key workers, critical workers as defined by HMGov during the COVID-19 pandemic, the following organisations in recognition of the eminent services rendered to this borough during the COVID-19 pandemic, Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust on behalf of all key workers in the public sector, involve Kent on behalf of all key workers in the voluntary sector, and 1 Maidstone on behalf of all key workers in the private sector, be admitted to be honorary freemen of the Borough of Maidstone. And 2, that the role of honorary freemen of freedom of the borough be amended to include the above organisations and to express that it is received on behalf of all key workers in the borough for eminent services rendered to this borough during the pandemic. And 3, that an extraordinary meeting of the council be convened in March 2025 around the 5th anniversary of the first lockdown to resolve the same accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, colleagues. I'm sure many of us have rather unpleasant memories of 5 years ago. It certainly wasn't one of the happier times of my life, but I am here to remember it, and a lot of people are not. Organisations, including Maidstone Borough Council, have a memory, an institutional memory, that ordinary members of the public, individuals may not have. And to a certain extent, it is up to organisations with an institutional memory and that sort of civic coherence to mark and to remember the history of our town and the times that we have gone through. Those of us who do not remember our history and learn from it are often doomed to repeat it, as the saying goes. So I think it is important that we as a civic organisation remind ourselves and the public now and in the future of the hard work and sacrifices involving not a little degree of danger in many cases for key workers that we have gone through in the past. Not least so that those people out there who tell us that there was no COVID epidemic, that it's all a vast conspiracy, that it's all got up as some sort of plot, are reminded very clearly that it wasn't, but it took lives, and there was a great deal of sacrifice and hard work put in by many sectors of the community in Maidstone to address the threat that we faced. And that threat was most severe to our most vulnerable and in many cases most elderly populations. So I think this is a merited action to take, and it is timely to do so to present the award on the 5th anniversary. I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The pandemic was a terrible time for many people, whether it was those living in the community who lost loved ones, for those working in frontline services who in many cases risk their lives every day, especially those working in intensive care units, when people worked without the correct PPE, with waiting for a vaccination to be found, to be used. I was lucky enough to be one of the ones who was in the sort of first tranche of people to be vaccinated. I think it showed a time when this country pulled together in various different aspects, whether it was people doing voluntary work, whether it was the public sector, whether it was farmers, whether it was delivery drivers. It was a time when people pulled together. I just think this is a small recognition, and this group is representative of all those people. And I know how much was done in Morden, in Staplehurst, working with client groups out in those areas. And Silke was here doing the prayers tonight, and I know I had clients out in Staplehurst who relied on what the churches were doing out there during this time, and it was very difficult, especially for those who were not mobile, enough to be able to go out for that regular walk or get food, that people delivered food to them. We are one of among a number of cities and towns that have gone down this route. We will never be able to name everyone who did great work at that time, but I think it shows a recognition by, as Councillor English says, the institution of a terrible time when this country pulled together, and when we look to come out of that time and hopefully remember those times when things get tough again. So I'm happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to support this proposal on behalf of the wider community in terms of giving it to these specific groups. I think Maureen and Clive have said a lot, but I'd just like to say a couple of words. I think we should also thank all our key workers in the borough, as I think Stuart said, going right out to the whole community, because it was only due to those that the rest of us who weren't key workers survived through the pandemic. If the people in the shops weren't there, our shop workers weren't there, we wouldn't have been able to get food. If our refuse collectors from our own staff weren't there, well, heaven help, what would have happened? So, you know, those people put their lives on the line, and actually a lot of those people did die as a result of COVID. And I notice in our briefing note, it tells us that over 600 of our residents in Maidstone died during the pandemic. And perhaps one of the things we may be able to look into between now and March 2025, when we actually do the formal award, is how we can perhaps publicly mark and remember those who did die in Maidstone. And one simple idea, maybe we've got plenty of time to look into, perhaps we could look at a memory wall somewhere, where there's a list of all the people who died in the borough. It could easily be somewhere like the Lock Meadow complex or somewhere in the town centre, but somewhere where people could go and remember. As we have a war memorial to remember those who lost their lives in war, it would be really good to have a memory wall where ourselves and people who did lose relatives could actually go as well. So on that basis, I'm happy to support the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a difficulty with this, I'm afraid. I think everybody in this chamber has incredible respect for those in the NHS and the key workers who work tirelessly and at their own risk throughout COVID. But so many people, so many other people in the borough went above and beyond to help neighbours, to help their local community, and this doesn't recognise that. So this is excluding so many people. So I do have an issue, I'm very sorry. And secondly, I'm astonished that Councillor Jeffrey can propose and vote on something he benefits from. I'm really sorry, in every other area of council life, if you have an interest, you can't vote on it. And I really would like a view on that, because I think that is wrong. He will benefit technically from a freedom of the borough, and he's proposing it and he's voting on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure that this motion has been put with the best of intentions. It really is with the best of intentions, and I respect that. You wish to honour all key workers in all the voluntary, all those sectors. I get that. But to my mind and in my personal view, it is far too wide-ranging, far too broad, far too disparate. You've just mentioned, Councillor Springett, people who weren't key workers but worked damn hard. I can think of a few examples right now. I wasn't one of them. And consequently, I think that there's an incongruity, it's incongruous, that's what I'm trying to say, in the choice of representative organisations. It doesn't quite add up. Well, at least one Maidstone is ironically town-centric, but you're talking about Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells Trust, involve Kent. It's very broad, and I don't believe that it's sufficiently mitigated by the second part of the motion, which does try to restrict it to the borough. So bearing in mind these representative organisations, they would be entitled to a ceremonial role at civic functions. That doesn't feel inclusive enough for me. I would feel uncomfortable about that. I think the entire motion unintentionally but effectively undermines and weakens the privilege of having the honour bestowed. I will not be supporting this seemingly nebulous motion with respect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too, like the previous two speakers, feel slightly uneasy about speaking out on this motion, and I totally recognise Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor English. It does come from a good place, and I do not dismiss the work of our key workers. However, my issue with it is in fact that I don't actually think it goes far enough. For example, the motion refers or has some reference to some of the colleagues, for example, that I worked with in a local supermarket, but does not have any mention of the thousands and thousands of students who sacrificed their university and education and development in order to stay at home and keep people safe. I don't believe there's a single individual who did not go above and beyond in this country during the pandemic, and there is nobody, unwilling or otherwise, who did not give up their fundamental and basic freedoms to keep others safe, and therefore I cannot support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think when you live through a genuinely epoch-making event, you sometimes lose sight of its gravity and just how significant that event was. And, you know, in my role, I drew up the multi-agency gold strategy for the response in Kent and Medway, and I chaired the tactical coordinating group. However, I think what really humbled me was the people who were working at the hospitals that we were trying to get the PPE for. It was the likes of, as you say, the people working in the supermarkets and so on. And I think the key workers is a way, it was the people who had to go that step further. And just within my team, you know, 24/7, having to get out the PPE, which was so difficult to procure, just to find the masks, just to get hold of the aprons, just to do it, and just the numbers needed in the residential care homes, in the extra care for children and so on. It was literally well, like a military operation, 24 hours around the clock, and it was the key workers who delivered that, and it really did make a difference in terms of life saved. It was not an academic. It actually genuinely, the work that was done saved lives, and it also risked lives. So I think it is the least we can do to thank those who went that extra step. And I do not dismiss for a moment the disruption to lives. You know, I'd have hated to have been young. You know, it just disrupted everything, and it's never recovered since. You know, it is a different world. And that's why that kind of epoch-making component we mustn't lose sight of. But I really would ask that we give this our wholehearted support, because of the sacrifice that the key workers made. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I fully support the motion, and I think it does cover everyone, And as Councillor Forecast said about the students, and Val Springett said about our neighbours, there was lots of people making sure their neighbours were okay all over who weren't key workers, but that's covered by community support. And I think that if you can't vote for this, I think it's a great, great shame. But if you don't want to vote for it, we've all got our own, you know, we're a democratic house. If you don't want to vote for it, don't vote for it. But I think it's a wonderful thing that we should be doing, and I think it represents everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with just about everything that's been said so far, one way or another. But I see this includes financial services in the private sector. I mean, financial services, well, banks, and I mean, where does this all stop? And I'll tell you something else that's not specifically mentioned. Again, I'm a little bit fed up with this. This chamber seems to ignore the smaller rural communities time and time again. I can guarantee you places like Oldcombe, places like Bourton Malaby, places like East Sutton, they had very few key workers actually there. It was neighbours helping neighbour, just like it was during the war. It was neighbours helping neighbours. And that's not mentioned there really. You talk about community services, but these are people, not in any organisation, they're just helping their neighbours. But that's not mentioned here. And they were really the backbone of what went on in the rural communities. They were the people who helped everyone out. That's it for me. But I cannot support this motion in its current format. It's too all-inclusive. It includes just about everyone, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I saw this on the agenda, I thought this is motherhood and apple pie. Who's going to object to this? But I've listened this evening and some interesting points have been raised. We've gone well past the memorials of the Second World War where it was just the Army, the Air Force and the Navy, armed services. In the Second World War, my mother worked in a munitions factory. I don't remember her ever being honoured, and millions of other people. Now, we've learnt from that, and I think this motion put forward, the wording, maybe it could be tweaked a wee bit, but you know, where do we stop? The sentiments of this are right. We cannot deny this, and I certainly will be voting for it, but I hope that we may be able to just tweak it to bring on board the Doubting Thomases. Thank you.
And thank you, Mayor. Doubting Thomas here. So, I mean, I think there's a really sort of good sentiment to this motion. I agree with a lot of it, but like many of the other people who have spoken already, it's just too all-encompassing. It covers too many people. I was a key worker selling food and providing fresh produce. My wife was a key worker educating the children of key workers going into school. I asked her about this, and she said that she said she was doing her job, and every day she went into work to educate the children of the key workers who came into school. She felt like she was just doing her job. And I said, "Do you think you deserve the freedom of the borough?" And she said, "Well, not really." And she was very frank. She said that should be for individuals who have done remarkable things. And I think this is so all-encompassing, it does sort of undermine the award slightly. I don't know how we go about marking the contributions of these people, whether it's Councillor Harper's idea or sort of something else that cross-party we can talk about. But I just don't think this is the method of acknowledging their work. So I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I've heard that the motion's too wide, and I've heard that it's too narrow, so it's probably about right. I've heard that volunteers are not being honoured, but clearly they are within the motion. So I don't really understand the objections. I've heard that colleagues put their lives on, and friends and others put their lives on the line. I lost colleagues that died. Either we honour the people who put their lives on the line so that some form of life could carry on, or we don't. I do ask that everybody supports this motion.
Testing, testing, 1, 2. Can you all hear me? Thank you very much.
Apologies, I didn't mean to keep you standing. Yeah, okay, thank you. Oh, right, okay, I'll do that. Yeah, okay, will do. Just shut that down. Apologies, I just want to sort my papers out if I may. Right, so I'm going to repeat what I said before, but before I do, there's one extra apologies to say, which is Councillor Wilby, I believe. So that will be recorded formally for the agenda. Thank you. So these proceedings will be webcast and recorded by the Council, but will anyone else be recording or filming them? I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this will be happening. Councillor Mackay, I think you're on stage for the second time.
Mr. Mayor, I reserve my right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right, so the apologies I've already repeated, but I'll do for the last meeting, but I'll repeat it again. The apologies are for Councillors Clark, Cook, Jones, Reardon, Spooner, what's one other? Barwick. And Wilby, yeah. Yeah. Are there any other apologies? I don't think so. Okay. Agenda item 2, are there any applications for dispensation? Again, this should be addressed to Angela Woodhouse, who's the Deputy Monitoring Officer, as members should have completed a written request dispensation before the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There have been none.
Thank you, Andrew. Agenda item 3, are there any disclosures of interest by members?
Nothing pertaining to the agenda.
Okay, there's nothing for this one on the agenda. Okay. Agenda item 4, are there any disclosures of lobbying? No. I see none. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 5, is it agreed that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed? Agreed. Thank you, members. Agenda item 6, are the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Borough Council held on the 25th of September 2024 agreed as correct record? Agreed. Thank you, members. Agenda item 7 are the minutes of the meeting of the Borough Council held on the 25th of September 2024 agreed as a correct record. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, members. Right, this comes down to myself, and I just wanted to say straight away, as we had a minute's silence for Wendy Marlowe, and I just want to pay a tribute to her myself, and then I'll open the floor, so I know some of the members will want to do the same. She's sadly passed away in August, and clearly we didn't know until quite recently that this has happened. Wendy was, she joined the Borough Council, she's a member from 1991 to 2003, and she represented Shepway East and Shepway North wards. She was on numerous committees, but she was particularly interested and concerned about housing, and indeed she became a cabinet member for housing when the council first went over to the executive system. She was also leader of the Labour group for some 8 years, which is quite a long time to be a leader of a group. And before stepping down, she stepped down basically to concentrate on her cabinet position on housing, which is an area that she was particularly keen to specialise in. Another point to note is that Wendy and her late husband, Alan, were the landlords of the award-winning Rifle Volunteers Public House in Wyatt Street, and this is for many years. And I know there are still people who remember them being there, and obviously miss them or not. So she was a very formidable member of this council. But I know there are some members here who would like to say something, and as well. So I'm going to ask Councillor Tom Sams to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've outlined Wendy's role on this council and in this community. I first met Wendy when I joined this council back in 1995. She'd been a councillor in Shepway since, as you said, 1991, and she remained on this council until, I believe, 2003, as you already outlined. What Wendy lacked in height, she made up with her significant, fiery and feisty character. She was extremely determined, and in particular, as you said, keen on housing and this council's commitment on this to its residents. This was so very important to her. Though probably only a few councillors were left here will remember the battles that she had with the opposition, I do remember another side to her as well. I think looking around the room, I can probably see a couple of faces that remember Wendy sitting in this chamber and her shaking her fist at the opposition on numerous occasions. However, I do remember on one occasion, it was the 1997 general election. Our Labour candidate was Jack Hazelgrove. Jack Hazelgrove was a very sweet man. He was a magistrate and a great candidate. Sitting at the Labour headquarters at Albion Place, disaster struck. The imprint was missing from about 30,000 leaflets. So, what did Wendy do? Well, she organised a team to be a dedicated team to stick the tiny writing, it was absolutely minuscule, on 30,000 leaflets. And who was the first person with the pot of glue, or was it the glue stick? I can't really remember, but it was Wendy. And she was led by example, and we did get through those 30,000 leaflets. But also at the end of in the early hours of the morning, she ran back to the pub, the Rifle Volunteers, and brought down hot pies for everyone as a reward for doing it, because we had to be very tenacious. Now, that just shows that she was indeed generous of spirit. And also, I have to say, and probably the two members of the council I couldn't see in front of us would also remember, she had a wicked sense of humour. But above all, she helped so many along the way. She was a remarkable character. On behalf of our group, we send our condolences to her family and friends, and Wendy will miss you and your character and your fiery spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tom Sands. Thank you. Councillor English, please.
I actually bumped into Wendy quite some time before I was elected to the council in 1994. Many of you may not be aware that before she was so actively involved with Maidstone Borough Council, she actually worked for the county planning department and had quite an interesting career there. Wendy and I, and Tony and Wendy, had, I think, hundreds of stand-up rows with Wendy in council committees and in this council chamber. Both sides utterly convinced that we were right and the other side was wrong. What could not be said against Wendy was that she lacked passion, conviction, or commitment to pursuing the Labour cause. Back in the day in High Street Ward, I had some tremendously close electoral contests with the Labour machine led by Wendy, and got through them all, but blooming heck, some of them were close-run things. She worked tremendously hard to represent both the political party she stood for and the principles she believed in, and the residents that she served in Shepway East and then later Shepway North. We disagreed on a tremendous range of things, but what I can say is she cared very, very deeply for the people of this borough, put in a tremendous amount of effort, and I miss her since she retired from this council, and it is a shame that she's passed away. In later years, she actually worked part-time for Royal Mail, so I came across her in a different set of circumstances, and I have to say that both in that job and in her role as a landlady at the Rifle Volunteers, she put a lot of work in, and I have to say I don't know where she found the time, because it's difficult enough doing one career, but when you're trying to do three, it's quite challenging. So on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group, I'd like to pay tribute to an honoured competitor and rival of the past who put a lot into serving the people of Maidstone.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Cleater, current leader of the Labour group, so very appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I knew Wendy mainly as the landlady of the Rifle Volunteer pub, due to the fact that my branch secretary of Nalgo used to pop down there at lunchtime for a pint and a political discussion with Wendy, because he was a member of the Labour Party. And I always remember getting sent down there to drag him back out to say, actually, you've got a meeting with the chief executive, can you get back from the pub, please? This political discussion is really good. I also know that Wendy made a cracking roast dinner at the Rifle Volunteers. But I actually incurred Wendy's wrath. Many, many moons ago, I was a member of another political party, and I had the gall to stand in the general election. People were told not to speak to me, and there was a newsletter that went round instructing that, which I actually found quite amazing, because a lot of the people didn't actually know who I was, and I was standing for a very minor party in my 12 months of revolution, then I got some sense. But Wendy was a feisty lady. You incurred her ire at your risk, and I did. But she was passionate, and myself and Councillor Barwick and Councillor Wilkinson are proud to carry on her tradition in Shepway. I'm proud to carry on the tradition for fighting for decent housing throughout this borough, not just in our. And I'm pleased that we work together cross-party, because we've had cross-party meetings, for example, with Golden Homes, to try and improve the housing stock and to try and improve the lives of people who are living in social housing. And I think that's a testament to Wendy's legacy, that everyone, no matter what party they are from, are passionate about delivering better conditions for people who live and thrive within this borough. So I escaped with my life. I can say that she is actually, for all she is feisty, and if you oppose her, you knew, but she was very generous and very supportive to those who were trying to make their way. And I would have loved to have seen what Wendy would have made of some of this social media stuff at the moment, because I think some people would have got away with a box steer and leave it at that. But condolences to everyone, not just her family and friends, but those colleagues around here who worked with her. She was a character, she was forthright, she was assertive, everything that a councillor and everything that a woman should be. Rest in peace, Wendy.
Thank you, Councillor Cleaser. Councillor Harper.
I'm afraid there's going to be a fair amount of repetition here, but I did do some research, and clearly quite a few people use the same sort of research as myself. So we know Wendy ran the Royal Volunteers pub, and she ran it as a good old-fashioned pub with no music and no machines, with her husband Alan, and she ran it, as Maureen said, with an iron fist. But her favourite tipple wasn't one of the three types of Gosher's finest ales. It was actually Fernet Branca. So she wasn't a particular beer drinker. She had been a councillor for 12 years for Shepway East and North, from 1991 to 2003. So a long period of time. And if she'd have been here now, we would probably be giving her the aldermanship of the borough for the work she's done. She managed to win 5 elections and actually got votes of over 1,000, and 65% of the people in her area used to vote for her. So she obviously was doing something right. Soon after coming on the council, in 91, she became Labour's group housing spokesperson, and she was also the leading light in the Maidstone Against Privatisation campaign, which was a group consisting of council tenants, Labour councillors, and wait for it, and the then Liberal Democrat councillor, Keith Atkinson, who some people here may remember. And it was actually Wendy's influence, with Keith working with her on that campaign, which then subsequently led Keith to actually switch to the Labour Party for 30 years until recently. But Wendy saw very early on the danger of Margaret Thatcher's policy of selling off council houses, and the fact that it would lead to precisely where we find ourselves now, with a complete lack of affordable homes. She led a very successful campaign which led to an overwhelming majority of our council tenants voting at the time to stay with the council when they had to have the ballot which the government enforced on authorities if you wish to maintain council housing. And the campaign she led, which was, as I say, successful in 93, actually won national coverage in the Guardian newspaper, and it had quotes from her and Keith over how they'd managed to lead that campaign in Maidstone. She was slip of the tongue there. She was a Labour Council leader from 94 through to 2002, when at the time the Labour Party had over 16 councillors, or 16 councillors on this borough, and was the second largest party. When Wendy stood down from being Labour leader in 2002, she is quoted, and I found this out yesterday, "I'm not going anywhere. I feel it's time to concentrate on the housing issues to ensure tenants are properly consulted, have their views heard, and everything is done properly and above board." Wendy was the Cabinet Minister on this council for housing from 2001 to 2003, when she retired from the council. and that, I suspect, was the passion she had, which was closest to her heart in public life. So thank you very much, Wendy, for all you've done for everybody who lives in Maidstone, and our thoughts go with everybody who knew you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back in the 1980s, 1990s, politics, local politics, was somehow a lot more visceral. I mean, it was genuinely, the tension was massive. And I remember some of the canvassing trips that Councillor English talks about, and they were more like a scene out of West Side Story sometimes when you came up against some Labour canvassers out and about on the streets. And local politics was also populated with some larger-than-life characters on all sides of the political spectrum. I think that was to do with the fact there was more clout, there was more money, it was a different age, and I think one of the critical points that was brought out, and Councillor Harper raised it, was around housing. There was still a lot of council housing stock and housing cases groups where you were literally going through individual family conditions and looking at ways of keeping them in their property and keeping them in their accommodation. Were daily events. We sat through housing casing group constantly, and there was a real closeness to your community because you were really seen as fighting on their side. And Wendy was deeply involved in that with some other real characters, people like kind of Councillor Jeff Ellis, and I think they were all kind of unashamedly old Labour and didn't have much time for the kind of Blairite snake oil of the time. So it was a really, really interesting time, and it was interesting. It was mentioned that Wendy was on everything. You know, I won't mention the fact that in those days you had an attendance allowance for attending meetings, and Wendy did go to a lot of meetings, which was quite interesting. But as I say, all my memories of her were good, but sometimes scary, and I just want to give my love to all her family at this sad time, be it a little belated. Thank you.
That's it. That's it. Okay. Say one thing on a different subject. The Mayor's personal assistant, Julie Webb, is retiring at the end of December, and Julie has been she's been an absolute marvellous support for me, along with Ray and Russell. Without the three of them, I don't think I could have done the job of Mayor. And Julie's run the office, organised all the events, and you've seen from my round robin letter that there are a lot of events that myself and Councillor Round have attended, and we should certainly miss Julie. She's done an absolutely fabulous job for many mayors. I'm the last one, but there have been many who've come before me that Julie's helped and got through the year. So I just wanted to say my personal thanks to Julie for all her hard work. It's such an essential job. If the role of Mayor is to continue, then we need a good support staff, and we have that in Julie, obviously, and with Ray and Russell, who stop me bumping into things and falling downstairs and doing the things that I tend to do if I don't have someone looking after me. So thank you to them as well. I just wanted to say that before I go on to the various things that we've been doing, and my thanks to Councillor Round here, who's obviously helped me out a lot. You've seen from the round robin that we've had a lot of events over the last 2.5 months, really, and they vary from what I would call very formal events. I attended the 40th anniversary of the combined courts here in Maidstone, and that was a very formal event, and we had the Lord Chief Justice come down, And it was quite interesting because I followed her up. We went to a Thanksgiving service in All Saints Church, and I followed the judges up the aisle of the church, and we got talking, as one does, and she turned round, this is Baroness Carr, the Lord Chief Justice, and she looked at my badge of office, and she said, well, that's a much better badge than I've got around me. So I thought, well, that's good. You know, Maidstone is up there with the Lord Chief Justice. But she's a charming lady, and it was a very, very interesting event. And we've been to quite a few like this, including I did the civic launch of the Poppy Appeal with obviously the Remembrance Day service is very, very important as well. And we also I attended the Justice Service at Rochester Cathedral. This is for the Kent Justices as well. And that's a very big and important event where the Lord Lieutenant was present as well. And smaller events like the licensing of the vicar at St Andrew's Church in Barming, which again was a very pleasant and very interesting event. But the big charity events, the one I suppose I want to mention, highlight, is the Shaun the Sheep, because that was a wonderful event. It contributed. I went to the auction, the final auction, and we raised over £250,000 from that, which was pretty fantastic, I think. And it was a wonderful event, and certainly the mayor the auctioneer did offer to auction off my chain of office, and I was kind of tempted, you know, because it's a very good cause, but I think I'd have had to have left the country if I'd done that. A bit like Mayor Broughton on the board up there, I would have probably retired to Switzerland. But so that was very, very important. The other one, again, it was tied in the Heart of Kent Hospice, was the Voices for Hospice, which was a concert given at the Moat Leisure Centre. And again, we had a very big audience. It was a massive audience and a major choir. It was a combination choir of the choirs in Maidstone. And they gave a wonderful concert there, which I really appreciated. And again, they asked me, there's one problem being mayor is you don't plan it, but someone will come up to you and say, well, will you say a few words? You know, so you end up speaking to this pretty big audience, but luckily it didn't put me at the very end. They put me sort of before the last act was coming on, so I could say basically I wasn't the warm-up act for the gondoliers that was about to follow on the programme. But it was again a wonderful event, and I think very important. The other one, a big charity event, which again was important for me personally, was called Sight Matters. It was organised by Kent Association for the Blind, which will cater for partially sighted people like myself, and they were at Moat Leisure Centre, and this is the reason actually why I've got this very bright light here, because but it was a very, very well organised event, and I spent a lot of time there, and it's again a very important charity that we need to support. And I suppose the other one is the Citizens Advice Bureau, which I attended the AGM. And again, this is an organisation. When I first became a councillor, I attended the CAB for a whole day, sat with them and watched their work and everything. And it's very impressive what they do. And I know they have a strong link with Maidstone Borough Council. So it's a great pleasure to chair their AGM and talk with them as well. On a smaller scale, I attended the Maidstone Mediation Scheme AGM, which I know Councillor English has a very strong link to, and they do on a smaller scale here, but they do very important work in mediation. They've helped residents in my own ward, and I very much appreciated attending that AGM as well, because I think they do a particularly worthwhile job. So it's been, as I say, a very busy time. There have been some fun events, Diwali for the Indian community, and also the Nepalese community as well. And they've been some pretty fun events, I have to say, and well worth attending. Coming up, for the next few weeks, I've got a lot of concerts coming up. Obviously, it's the Christmas time, and there's a lot of charity concerts coming up as well. But the one I think is very important is the it's going to take place at the Friars, which is Light Up Life, which again is linked to the Heart of Kent Hospice, which is such an important and wonderful organisation. And I shall be doing a reading there from a wonderful poem by Wendell Berry, and I'm looking forward to that, because it's something I think that it's we need to promote the mayor's role in various activities that we do in the borough. And I'm very strong on promoting the borough, and this is part of the job of being mayor, and it's something I enjoy very much, but I also think is very important for the work we do. I'm very proud of this council and the work that it does, and anything I can do to promote it, all the best. And I just wanted to add one other thing, was that we've had two very good charity events. The garden party, which is very traditional at Turkey Mill, and the other one, which is the Hush Heath, at the Hush Heath Winery, which was hugely successful, and I got some amazing feedback from the people who attended it, and it was a great pleasure to give it. It was actually took place in what I would term the People's Republic of Staplehurst. So I was very proud. I was very proud of being able to do it in my own ward, and that's what. I'm sorry I've gone on a lot, but I think the work that we try and do, and Martin's done a tremendous amount as well, is something I say I enjoy doing, and I hopefully it's of benefit to this council, which is again something I'm very proud to be part of, and the borough as a whole. So I'll stop there. But Martin, I don't know if you want to say. Okay, right. So if there's any questions, of course, I'm happy to take them. I know I've gone on a bit, but no. Okay, right. Okay, we'll. No. Well, there's no petitions, so you'll probably be relieved to know. So we'll go on to agenda item 10. There are no questions from local residents, which means that everybody must be very happy with what we're doing in the council. But anyway, I do. Okay, agenda 11. But we do have questions from councillors. So I received notification that Councillor Springett wishes to ask a question of the Cabinet Member for Planning, Policy and Management. To Councillor Springett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Planning applications are often contentious, but conditions can be applied to mitigate the impacts and make the development more acceptable. However, we rely on the planning enforcement team to deal with situations where conditions are not complied with. Residents rely on us and trust us to do this. Residents also expect us to deal with unauthorised development. The previous administration ensured that the planning enforcement team was fully funded and fully staffed to undertake proper enforcement. Can the Cabinet Member for Planning, Policy and Management please confirm that this department is still fully funded and fully staffed? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Springett. Councillor Harwood.
Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Springett, for the question. I mean, as you will all be aware, elected members and Cabinet members have no operational role in staffing matters day to day, and also the budget that was ascribed by the administration in the last financial year. So I am going to answer verbatim from the officer response, because I think I need to describe precisely the current situation within the team. At the beginning of the current financial year, the planning enforcement team comprised 6 staff, to include a part-time technical support officer and a team leader role. There is currently 1 vacancy for a planning investigation officer within the enforcement team that is being held. The reason for this operational decision is that per the Q2 financial position, the Development Management Service is experiencing considerably lower volumes of planning applications and pre-application advice requests, and so is currently forecasting a full year overspend of £681,000. Accordingly, there is a mandate to attempt to mitigate this situation, and the bulk of the cost base for the service is staffing. And I think this also talks to the changed spatial vision, where we've now got 3 strategic sites, whereas in the past we had a dispersed approach with scores of sites. So therefore, for Majors income, it's a significant structural change that we're dealing with. I continue. It is envisaged that this FTE will be captured as a permanent saving in the next iteration of the medium-term financial strategy, because the much reduced fee income levels are expected to continue at least into the medium term. If this situation changes, so would the case for replenishing staffing resource. However, across the Development Management Service in 24-25, the staffing headcount was in fact increased above budget in the summer with the recruitment of 2 new graduate planning officers. And they were recruited through the government's Pathways to Planning programme. So the net position in terms of overall staffing numbers in development management remains consistent, taking into account the departure of a planning officer in the autumn and the holding of the planning enforcement vacancy. The head of the service therefore has a full staffing complement of planning officers that can be deployed and flexed to best meet the broader and changing needs of the overall service, to include enforcement. However, it is important that we all remain mindful of the challenging financial operating environment for district councils, and that most development management services, both regionally and nationally, are experiencing much reduced planning application volumes and associated fee income, presumably because of the
Councillor, thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Springett, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of
Yes,
the Cabinet?
I do, please, Mr. Mayor. Well, as you have confirmed that department is 1 short, is there any point whatsoever in putting planning conditions on any planning application if we are intentionally and deliberately leaving this important department understaffed? And I'm aware that enforcement issues are not being pursued with the vigour they were being pursued with 18 months ago. So is there any point, could you advise me, in putting conditions on a planning application? Thank you.
I actually think that one of the strengths of planning in Maidstone is its planning conditions. And I think if you have a drive down Hermitage Lane or something, look at the applications that are in Maidstone Borough and look at the design, look at the landscape layout and so on. They are superior in Maidstone Borough. And a lot of local authorities use very generic conditions. We use very specific conditions. And yes, there is pressure, but as I stated earlier on, overall, the staffing complement in development management is not depleted, and planners can be relocated around the service to fill any gaps that are ongoing. And I think it's also worth, again, contrasting with other local authorities and our neighbours in terms of the fact that we have retained our development management staff and we're not relying upon expensive agency staff who do not know their area. So I actually think that planning management, development management in Maidstone Borough is in a very strong place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. I've received notification that Councillor Russell wishes to ask a question of the Cabinet Member for Planning, Policy and Management. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Within my ward and within your time in administration, the village of Yalding has recently been subjected to a Section 78 planning appeal for non-determination by the Planning Authority for an outline planning application for circa 112 houses. Following on from this, the Parish Council and I made it clear that this should not be allowed to happen again, as this represents a failure of Maidstone Borough Council Planning Authority to perform their statutory function. Just this month, the village of Yalding was once again subjected to a Section 78 planning appeal against non-determination by the Planning Authority for an application that concerns the former public house, the George. This will now be determined by a planning inspector with no local knowledge of the history of the application under a system of written representations. As the Cabinet Member for Planning, Policy and Management, how will you make sure that the Planning Department has the necessary resources, skills within it to make sure that these Section 78 appeals for non-determination do not happen within our borough again?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in some ways this question's already been answered with the previous question, that we still are up at full strength in contrast to a lot of our neighbouring authorities. The question is actually quite kind of regulatory in nature and operational in nature. So again, it's not really a policy issue. So I will again give a reply that's almost verbatim to the officer view. When the local planning authority receives a planning application, it has between 8 and 13 weeks to determine it, with the government stipulates, to length, unless it can secure an extension of time with the applicant to lengthen the determination period. If the council did not make use of extension of time approach, it would mean that it didn't have the same scope to positively influence applications before they are determined. And so in reality, it could mean refusing more applications in a statutory determination period, and that these decisions could then be overturned at appeal, which I think is a really important point, especially on big and complex applications. Right, without, yeah, and then extension of time requests are reasonable from the local planning authority, and I think that point needs to be made. And enhancements can and regularly are mutually agreed with developers or their agents. But there is a risk that this process allows matters to become protracted, with multiple new considerations being introduced, with reconsultations being required, etc. Many stakeholders do have a role to play in whether the use of extensions of time prove beneficial, and I am aware that in the respect of the George at Yalding, the Parish Council called in the application to Planning Committee and lobbied for the decision to be deferred, which it was by committee, which I think is important. The applicant then chose to go to appeal for non-determination, so that's a regulatory matter in terms of the Planning Committee and the determination of that committee. In the case of the other sites that I know Yalding Parish Council have been very interested in, that local plan review site, the outline application was for a density above that proposed in the local plan review policy. And our officers were attempting to negotiate with the applicant to bring the application back in line with our agreed policy. The applicant on this occasion decided against a further extension of time, and so again went to appeal for non-determination. Although I am aware that the lead director did attempt to persuade the applicant not to take this approach. Whilst regrettable, these instances do and will happen. However, they are not because of a lack of skill or resources in the planning service, Indeed, in terms of development management staffing, as previously mentioned, Maidstone is in an extremely strong position with all planning officers directly employed and with no use of agency staff. Thank you.
Councillor Russell, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of the Cabinet Member for Planning Policy Management rising out of your original question or the reply?
I do, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that was a long answer to just say basically your end date's coming up, set yourself a reminder. If you're not going to get it done, maybe refuse it and then let's go to appeal on that basis rather than non-determination. My question is going to sound like a former colleague of mine, Marion Ring. As my residents say, just start by getting the bins emptied and the planning right before you do anything else. Do you agree?
Sorry, I didn't really catch any of that. However, it was a long explanation because planning is complex and is complicated. In one case, the deferral, which upset the applicant, was because the planning committee agreed with the parish council and the local members and sought that. In the other case, as I previously set out, there were more units and a higher density being proposed than our policy allows, and therefore there was an attempt to negotiate an acceptable outcome to both parties. But as is their right, the applicant decided that they would rather take their chances of appeal. I do not think in either of those cases our planning officers, who are extremely hard-working, can in any way be faulted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. I received notification that Councillor Harper wishes to ask a question of the Cabinet Member for Environment, Mental Services and Enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would the Cabinet Member for Environmental Services and Enforcement like to confirm when the expansion of the Medway Street car park, which is provided for in the capital programme, will proceed? This is a much needed development for a car park which is often overfull to capacity and has been planned for over 2 years.
Councillor English.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Harper. As councillors will know, I, as a member who represents High Street Ward, are always concerned to try and ensure that there is the maximum amount of car parking space available, not so much for visitors to the town, although that's important, but for the residents of High Street Ward, who have increased in number quite considerably over the last few years and do need somewhere to park, particularly as they are not, in many cases, entitled to residence permits because the street layout does not permit it, and the only places they can park are the council's owned car parks. So I supported and continue to support the provision of car parking at Medway Street car park. Some complications have arisen, and it appears, and the Council Cabinet has been considering a revised scheme which, in accordance with the adopted local plan, which I did not support, by the way, that Medway Street does have an allocation for a housing development loan. So what we are trying to do is ensure that there is a scheme which provides a new and improved car parking facility at Medway Street and the housing allocation. This has led to a delay. I'm afraid that's inevitable when one is trying to balance considerations and come up with a scheme that meets dual objectives. So I cannot give you a firm date, but what I can give you is a promise that we are still committed to provide parking, improved parking at Medway Street, and also to carry forward a local plan, although many of us on this side did not actually vote for it, but we have to do that, don't we?
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Harper, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of the Cabinet Member?
Yes, please. I think the Medway Street car park, actually picking up on your point, Clive, would actually lend itself to a combination of car parking and pod housing. Councillors who were here probably 2 years ago will remember the discussions around the King Street car park, where we were looking at Z pods, and then parking underneath. Perhaps you could look into that option, as that would enable us to provide both the housing and the car parking needs at that site.
I don't want to talk too much about pod housing. That there are places where that is certainly an option. There are difficulties sometimes in the urban area where you place residential over car parks, because that can lead to an invitation to antisocial behaviour, and that may have been an issue at King Street. So I wouldn't want to say that here is a particularly appropriate location, although obviously we will look at things. What I will say is that we are committed to bringing forward proposals that will partly address our housing need and provide what everyone, I think, will think is a significant upgrade on car parking. But to do that requires time, and I cannot stand here in all honesty and give you a date, and I apologise for that.
Thank you, Councillor English. I received notification that Councillor Trubinski wishes to ask a question of the Cabinet Member for Environment Services and Enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. After 8 months of the new contract with Suez, despite the best efforts of our own waste management team, I'm still frequently getting reports from residents of food bins not being emptied weekly or being mixed with the larger waste bins. I understand this is due to an issue with the lack of suitable collection lorries, and we have another one on order. Can the Cabinet Member for Environmental Services and Enforcement please advise when the new vehicle will be delivered?
Thank you, Councillor Trubinski. Yes, there have been issues with the Suez contract, which we are all aware. Our own staff have worked tremendously hard, and I'd like to pay tribute to Jen and the team for the sheer amount of effort they put in. I'd like to thank those councillors and parish councillors and members of the public who have kept me and the management team in the loop going forward, and I hope we try to react to these things quite quickly. In relation to the specific problems you referred to, there have been a number of causes, but you've referred to a couple of them, and essentially there have been some issues with the size of the vehicles related to particular roads. Unfortunately, when we've had to send out smaller vehicles, they haven't always had the capacity to collect everything, and sometimes we've had to send out an additional vehicle to collect the food waste. This team is a different team usually, and therefore not necessarily au fait with all the information. So there have been occasions when that team has missed collections, there's no doubt about that. I am reliably informed that having rebalanced and moving work between rounds and looking at the capacity of the existing route, that from Monday the 9th of December, so quite imminent, all frontline rounds, including narrow access, will be operated with pod vehicles to ensure the segregated collection of food alongside the refuge or recycling, depending which week it is. So we are imminent, shall we say, to a solution being seen. Obviously, we hope and are fairly sure that this will work, but I ask members in areas such as this to make sure that we are duly informed in case there are any further problems. I'm sure that you will keep Jen and myself in the loop on this, as you have in the past, but I hope that a solution will be with you next week. I assume you have a supplementary.
Thank you, Councillor English. That completes the questions, so I'm going to say...
It does have a supplementary.
Oh, it does supplementary, I'm sorry. I jumped the gun. Sorry, Councillor Chavinsky. Apologies.
Thank you, Clive. I wish I had absolute faith in what's going to happen, but I've been told time and time again that the problem's solved and something else is happening. And particularly with the Christmas period coming up and the associated extra waste that brings, particularly food waste, can you reassure our residents that steps have or will be taken to ensure that they will be receiving an excellent waste collection over the next few weeks? And I hear what you say about Monday, but somehow that needs to be monitored very quickly and very cleverly so that we actually do get the service we require over the winter period. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Travinsky. All I can do is say that I and the team will be doing everything we can to monitor this as closely as possible and to try and ensure that the arrangements that we've made, which we think are robust, do survive contact with reality. I know I can rely on you and your colleagues and other colleagues around the chamber to let me know if by some chance we have been over-optimistic. But all we can do is our best, Ziggy, and I would like to say that I'm convinced that Jen and Graham and the others have been doing their best.
Thank you, Councillor English. We now can go on to agenda item 12, and I call upon the Leader of the Council to submit his report on current issues. Councillor Jeffrey, you may speak for up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. As usual, I'm going to start by saying that we don't live in a bubble. What happens in national government and in other parts of the country and the world affects people here. Two things that spring to mind. Firstly, since we last met as a full council, devolution and local government review have risen up the agenda, and I've been working with leaders across Kent to ensure that we get some form of say in what will probably in effect be done to us. And secondly, I have expressed my frustrations on the pause on the decarbonisation project. That was driven by a huge national increase in the demand for cladding over the last 12 months, resulting in significant price impacts. The team are working on Plan B. Better news, we've commenced our stakeholder steering groups for the 3 garden community supplementary planning documents, which will be our master plans for those areas. It is essential that we get these right so that the new communities are truly sustainable. We certainly recognise the challenges ahead, and we do seek to ensure that local people have their concerns understood through this process. Last week, we had many members attended the launch of the next local plan. Local plans, a bit like painting the Forth Road Bridge. In addition to that, we're working up plans for a new landscape character assessment document, and that goes alongside the work on the Greensand Ridge National Landscape Bid. The Gypsy Roma Traveller Development Planning Document consultation is underway, and I hope you've all contributed your comments and reached out to your communities to add theirs too. The resident survey results are being analysed, and the headlines from the section on our strategic plan, which we are now calling corporate strategy, show that the vast majority of respondents, around 80%, are happy with the direction of travel, which is great news. And the work to bring this new strategy to full council, along with an aligned budget early next year, continues apace. In other consultations, we've responded to the government over the NHS 10-year plan and the industrial strategy, putting a very different voice into the mix. On the industrial strategy, we discussed our thoughts with the Kent and Medway Economic Partnership as well. I'm sure everybody here visited the best eco hub so far in the mall last month, and hopefully you watched it morph into the Christmas donation hub. The donation hub is currently taking about £500 of donations each day, more than double last year's figure. Please do pop down there and volunteer if you've got some time spare. It is well worth doing. This year's homelessness street count was very wet. 3 hours of walking in Storm Connell at 3 AM in the morning was pretty sobering, but so were the discussions with the people that we met there. There's certainly been an increase in rough sleeping, and we are redoubling efforts to reduce it. You will have seen from PAC papers. As far as other equity-related events go, I'd like to give a quick shout-out to the excellent day that was put on at the Town Hall celebrating Black History Month. We've done a fair bit of lobbying as well to government. We've flagged to Angela Rayner specific concerns about the office to residential conversions and the London Borough's out-of-area replacements, with the subsequent impacts on the lack of support that this has on a very vulnerable community. A letter went to Southern Water calling for a summit to discuss investment or the lack of it in their local West water infrastructure, flagging that Southern Water have trumpeted investment in their network in other parts of the region. And finally, the awful situation in Gaza continues to impact on local people, and I have written to David Lammy demanding that he does everything in his power to influence and help bring about a de-escalation. I'm keen to take questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I now call upon the other group leaders to respond, focusing primarily but not exclusively on the issues raised by the leader, and you each may speak for up to 5 minutes. And first of all, I call upon Councillor Russell, the leader of the Conservative group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Leader, for your report. I probably won't need my 5 minutes. We still await the corporate strategy and the budget that are coming. On the devolution, appreciate the time and effort that everyone's putting into finding out all that information and passing it on. We'll just wait to hear where that goes, really, from a lower tier authority point of view. Decarbonisation, oh, my favourite. So we started with the project. It was a good idea at the start. It was our administration that started it. Obviously, the costs rose. The costs just rose too high. The costs rose really high. We brought that to overview and scrutiny. Didn't listen then, got voted through. Pleased to see that you're listening now, and we'll wait to see what Plan B is. But something, you know, with an internal rate of return of 1.9%, even if it has a good aim, you need to look at those costs. Pleased to see that SPDs have been commenced for the strategic sites. Obviously, work on those must go at pace with the communities alongside to make sure that we get quality development in those areas. They're big locations and they need to be properly planned with all of the infrastructure that they require. Next local plan, my key thing here is resource it properly. Whatever you think it costs, it's going to cost more. So make sure that that has the proper resourcing as you go through. And again, we had a lot of comments about the policies for the local plan, so make sure that there's enough time to look at the policies for the next one. I mean, at the moment, we always talk about our strategic sites within our local plan adoption. It's 50% dispersal, it's 50% strategic sites. So when we do talk about dispersal moving forward, we do have that within this plan. So I think we need to be cognizant of that as we move forward into the next phase of what you say is a reoccurring hamster wheel that we never get off of. Landscape character assessment document, yeah, welcome looking at that. And the G&T planning document, yes, we've got till the 12th of December for the comments into that consultation. Resident survey, 80% of responders, excellent. I think that the data is obviously, you can extrapolate from that and you've got quality data. My issue here is how many responders? So, you know, in a borough of our size, what was the number that responded into that consultation? So leave you with that. Eco Hub, excellent. Christmas donation, turning into Christmas donation hub, excellent. And flagging concerns to central government. You know, I know that you're doing all of these different things. Again, I bring it back to, and it comes back to my question that I asked really about the planning, where I do feel my village has been let down. It seems that in the answer I got, the planning was fully staffed. We don't have enough planning applications to work on because of a downturn in applications, but yet we still can't get a determination in time to prevent a Section 78 appeal. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Criticism is fair sometimes, but criticism, when it's unfair and unfounded, shouldn't be what this council is about. I've sat on enough planning committees to know that sometimes Section 78 appeals for non-determination happen in ridiculous circumstances. We had an application for a STEM school at Invicta. We had sorted everything out with the applicant. They appealed for non-determination one day before that application was due to go to the planning committee with a positive recommendation for approval, because their agent advised them to do that, to get around a condition to preserve one tree. The result of that was they wasted a year because it set back the opening of the school because it took that long to hold the appeal. Sometimes applicants do silly things, and the council staff should not be criticised when appeals for non-determination are made in those circumstances. Second point that has been made about planning and local plan. Yes, the local plan is important and it needs to be properly resourced. And actually, currently, resourcing some of the other planning documents is actually vastly more important. We haven't had in this council, for various reasons and under various political leaderships, a landscape character assessment that is of much use for quite some time. So, and there are a number of other planning policies that we need to put in place to actually make our existing local plan work properly. So let's not get the cart before the horse, because we had this before, and one of the reasons we don't have adequate local supporting policies for the local plan is that certain previous administrations of varying colours, to be fair, argued, oh, well, we won't do that, we'll put that in the next local plan. We won't do that subsidiary policy, we'll put that in the next local plan. And lo and behold, it never was in the next local plan, and whatever policy one like to pick. So I believe that, and I hope the leader will confirm, that we are going to be moving on with the suites of supporting policies that we need to have in place to actually make our local plan into a document that's living and real rather than a static sheet of paper that sits in a filing cabinet somewhere and gets picked out when we need to revise it. And that's how I see it at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor English. I'll call upon Councillor Cleaser, the leader of the Labour Group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the report. I just think there's a number of things there that I'm just quite, again, I think Councillor Russell's touched on it, which is the data around the resident survey, whether we've got qualitative data. I know we discussed that earlier. I think that's really important, and if we can work out how people are responding, because not everyone can do digital, and I think the road shows that went out were a very positive thing, but I think maybe as we move forward, because I think we're making a lot of plans, we need to round that circle and actually again go back and check that what we're doing is what the residents want. I'm always, because I'm a sceptic, because I used to have to fill in the staff survey, it's how we frame them, because sometimes surveys can be to give us the answer we want rather than the answer we need to hear. So that's my one proviso on surveys, and I reserve the right to say that my cynicism is around staff surveys of my employers, not Maidstone Borough Council. I'll make that point quite clear. In terms of the NHS 10-year plan, I'm glad we're having some input in that, because the one thing I see as a borough councillor is that other people's cuts impact on us and we end up picking up a lot of the slack. So we need to have that more joined up working, and I don't just mean at the top level. because actually where it usually falls down is at that frontline level, and those of us who've worked on the front line, whether it's NHS, voluntary sector, local government, that's the reality of it. It's all very good in theory, but then it gets down to the bottom where it's actually implemented, and that's where it goes down. So I think that if we can keep that pressure up on that. Christmas donation hub, yes, I've done my volunteering stint and I'm down there tomorrow helping out. That could be seen as a good thing or a bad thing, by the way, for donations, but there you go. But people have been very generous from all parts of the community. They've been very generous when I've been there. It's sad that we need this in the 21st century. And I think when we get to a place where we don't need a Christmas donation hub would be a wonderful thing, but we are where we are. And I think it's incumbent on everyone, whether you're a parish, district, county councillor, whether you're an MP, actually to try and get the country to be a better place so we don't need that. The industrial strategies, I think trying to get people trained for the future, especially young people, is really, really key to whatever needs to happen, whether it's in Maidstone or whether it's countrywide. Obviously, everyone knows I'm from a trade union background and I defend the minimum wage increase. Let's be honest here, when people have to have top-up benefits to supplement their income, we're not subsidising that person. We're actually subsidising pretty big corporations who've chosen profit margins over paying a real living wage. Most people only want to have enough money to pay their bills, put a roof over their head, pay the gas and lecky, have the food bill, and maybe have a little bit left over for a treat. They're not asking to be millionaires. So for me, when I hear comments about people on benefits, I look and go, well, hang on a minute, a lot of these people, and some will work in local government, will work in the NHS, will work for Tesco's and Sainsbury's, etc. So the sooner we get those people out of having to claim benefits, the better we will be. And I think that's something that everyone can sign up to. The homeless street count, homelessness is still a real scourge. And it's a scourge up and down the country. We need to get better at working how to do that. And the London boroughs, I totally agree in terms of that. It's interesting that it's Matthew Pennycook MP, who is an MP in a London borough, by the way, who I've had discussions with around how we stop making it. I mean, at the end of the day, there's plenty of empty houses and buildings in London. It's the affordability of putting people in them. And that then cascades on to people placing outside the boroughs. It's not just London boroughs here, we have Tunbridge and Moreland, etc. We know that. And other than that, I would just like to say, because it's our last meeting before, I know we're going to have a Christmas party, but Merry Christmas, everyone. And I haven't written my cards yet, but I will do.
She's finished. Spot on. Spot on time, Councillor Cleater. I call upon Councillor Harper, the leader of the Independent and Fant and Oakwood group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Jeffries, for your report. I'll just pick up on one thing, first of all, which is the strategic plan. I think you've heard me at various meetings and packs in this meeting saying about my concern on the time it's taken to get a strategic plan. Without a strategic plan, it is impossible to implement new policies and to steer the council in a different way. And we're going to be faced now in January, during the January cycle, of looking at a new corporate plan, as it's now been titled. So we'll have a corporate plan, a 5-year medium-term financial strategy coming from that, and then the revenue budget for next year. Now, I imagine, based on the size of these documents, we're talking of everybody here will have a document of somewhere up to an inch thick and probably a whole ream of paper each landing on their doorsteps to be absorbed, typically in the course of 1 or 2 days, to then take part in hopefully a cohesive debate. And I just think we are in danger that we will be seen as just steamrolling it through. And I think it's unfortunate it's taken so long to get to that stage. I mean, picking up on consultation, it's been already raised the fact that typically with consultations, the people who respond are people who are probably in reasonably good condition. So typically, we found the budget report, which we've all seen, the provision of public housing and addressing the issue of homelessness, I think ranks as the bottom of the options pretty well from what's come out from our resident survey. Because I would imagine that most of the people filling in the resident survey have a home. You know, we're not getting to that small, or that's not that small, is it? That element of the community. So I think we do have to be slightly sceptical sometimes when we get the results of these surveys that they're not necessarily completely indicative of the wider community. I'm glad we did some events here for Black History in the town hall. And obviously earlier in the year we had Maidstone's first Pride. I think as a council we need to do everything we can do to celebrate the diversity of the various communities in the borough, and perhaps next year these events can be on a bigger scale, because, you know, but it's good to start, but we need to do more. We need to do more to celebrate all of our different communities here. The launch of the next local plan, it seems only like yesterday we agreed the current local plan. We all know this is a constant merry-go-round, invented presumably by some mischievous planner to keep planners in jobs. So you finish one plan, you start the next plan, halfway through a plan, oh, we've got to review it. So, you know, we'll all be stuck back into that lovely set of workshops as we've been doing almost, well, since I've been on this council, 10 years, of looking at local plans and so on. But hey-ho, there we go. The debate around devolution, which is where you started, Stuart, I think is going to be one of our major issues. Looking at the future, obviously local plans look at the future in terms of spatial development, but devolution and local government reorganisation will probably put everybody here out of work within the next couple of years as we move over to whatever structure we're being told we need to move to. But what we will need to do is to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that we're here to improve lives for people in Maidstone whilst we have a Maidstone Borough Council. And one of the things I'll be bringing forward to probably our February council meeting is a consideration, and I've spoken with Stuart about this and others will know my views on this, is looking into the issue of parish councils or town councils or whatever you want to call it in the urban area. Because if we do move forward to local government reorganisation, we can't afford to have the bulk of our residents having no input into a democratic process. A West Kent-wide local authority will not mean much to most residents. Residents relate to their local areas. So I will be bringing a motion to the council meeting to help further and engender that debate at an appropriate time. And on decarbonisation, Stuart helped only yesterday, Monday, planting a load of trees. In fact, we're in the process of planting over 2,000 trees in Gatland Park to soak up some of the carbon and actually help with biodiversity and rewilding. Thank you.
Oh, he says. Another one spot on. You must have been practicing your speech for a stopwatch, I think. Thank you. Well, thank you, members. Anyway, I'll now open the item, this item to questions from council members for a period of 15 minutes. Questions may be on any subject relevant to the role of the leader. I do have two. I have Tom Sams, Councillor Tom Sams and Councillor Janetta Sams. I don't know which one of you wants to speak first, but I'll leave you to make that one up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad the leader mentioned the stakeholders meeting that took place last week regarding the large proposed developments of Heathlands, Lidsing and Invicta Park. Regarding Heathlands, there are still parcels of land that owners do not wish to sell. Can I ask the leader if he can confirm his commitment that this council will not compulsorily purchase any land that is within Heathlands?
Councillor Jeffrey.
Well, thank you, Councillor Tom Sams. I spoke with Homes England 3 weeks ago and told them very clearly that I have no intention of doing a CPO. However, Homes England themselves do have that power, so and I don't have control over them. So yes, I have no intention of doing a CPO.
Councillor Janessa Sams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on those stakeholders meeting, it was very concerning that we were told by officers that the supplementary planning document procedure is suggested to be completed by summer, autumn 2025. The previous leader of this council stated, just on the proposed station at Heathlands, that the documentation was voluminous. How can this huge amount of work, alongside numerous agencies, be finished, including public consultations, in just 9 to 10 months? And can the leader elaborate on why the rush?
Councillor Jeffrey.
I think the figure that we were talking about was 12 months for the SPDs. It was interesting listening to the Ministry of Defence people the other week when we met as a three-group SPD group. They were very sceptical that we'd managed 12 months and said it was probably nearer 15 months. I think for me the key bit is, yes, we need to get on with this and we need to make it a document that is relied on for the master plan, but we also need to make sure that that document is absolutely the best it can possibly be. It will take some time to get there. I've never done an SPD. I'm guided by others in terms of that timescales, but I'm not going to sign off on something that isn't as good as it can possibly be.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Millen.
Right. Since the election, I've repeatedly struggled with problems outside of MBC's remit due to lack of action and communication from KCC, particularly the highways team. There is really a substandard level of communication and no joined up thinking between the people who do works on our roads, KCC and road users. Today, us in Fanton Oakwood Ward found out that the number 78 bus is going to be reduced to just one service due to these problems. Will local government reorganisation improve our ability to improve transport and ensure that roadworks are planned and there is better communication between all parties so impact on my residents' lives are as minimal as possible?
I'm not sure I'll answer that one. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. All my team seems to be asking questions about me. Thank you, Councillor Millen. So, I mean, the bottom line is, if local government reorganisation ends up with us being a unitary authority, it puts the local planning authority in the same organisation as the highways authority. That clearly has some a significant benefit in terms of the communication. So I think the short answer is it probably helps. I absolutely feel for residents in Fant. I've certainly visited the large sinkhole. I think it was 4 months ago. We've now got the power outage. I mean, it is just awful. I know Fant very, very well. I think the other bit that you raised there, and it comes back to Councillor Harper's point earlier, about the need for a town council. One of the things that we will, if we end up in that local government unitary process and end up as a unitary, one of the things I think we desperately will need is a town council to make sure that we are seamless at that level of representation, and that Maidstone maintains a voice within the larger authority.
Councillor Mackay. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following on from your comments or response to Tom Sands about compulsory purchasing land in Heathlands, your response was you weren't particularly in favour, but Homes England have the power. have we absolved ourselves of responsibility here, or abdicated our responsibility to Homes England in this respect? And in addition, bearing in mind I missed out a lot on the local plan. So have we decided yet regarding Heathlands what proportion of the housing will be social housing of one kind or the other? Or is that yet to be determined?
Interesting. Councillor Jeffrey.
In terms of the first part, absolved out, given that responsibility to Homes England, well, I said we're not going to do it. I also said that Homes England do have that power and are in those negotiations. So make of that as you will. In terms of the affordable housing level, I think it is 40%. So that is 2,000 affordable homes. I believe we get first offer of those homes once they're built, which is, I think, a good aspect of that development.
Are there any more questions? I don't see any. Yes, Councillor Jeffrey, sorry.
I noted in the Constitution that it is any member may ask a question of the leader, so I'd like to ask the leader a question. I just wondered if he'd like to give the number of respondents to Councillor Russell's question of comments earlier. So if I may just jump over this side and respond to myself, the answer was about 4,300 respondents to the residence survey, which I think is quite a good number, frankly. I know it's a small percentage, but lots of people are just not interested in answering. So I'm quite pleased with it, even if it's not a massive percentage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in response to the answer you gave Councillor Mackay, 40% social housing, which, as you know, is something of a passion of many in this area. My issue is, how do we stop the developers, who is us, saying it's not viable? Because we have a site at Springfield where there's zero social housing, and that is always my big worry, no matter who the developer is we get down to the nitty-gritty. At the end of the day, if people have done for land, when we had the training event on planning and that, and Rob was there, you know, we need to dig our heels in, I think, in some areas, and say, if you're not prepared to put social housing in, then, you know, you've reneged on what you've done. So I don't know whether you've got an answer, or go away and think about what we could do. But if we say 40%, we mean 40%, not 39, not 29, not 10, not 0. We mean 40%.
Right. Okay. I thought it was. Are there any more questions? Councillor Dawes.
I just wanted to ask about the count of homelessness. Oh, sorry. About the count of homelessness, you haven't given us a figure on how many homelessness have been found on our streets on that very rainy day?
Thank you, Councillor Dawes. Yeah, I think the figure was 11. I'm getting nodded at. Last year it was 6. The week before, the severe weather emergency protocol had been enacted, which means that people are moved into hotels, and they're there for some time, for a period afterwards as well. So the likely figure is probably higher than 11, so a substantial increase on last year.
Okay. I see no more questions, so unless someone's really desperate, I'm going to move on to agenda item 13. Okay? Right, good. So I call upon Councillor Field to move the recommendations of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee held on the 23rd of September 2024. And
Thank you,
the
Mr.
annual
Mayor.
report.
I know that members will diligently read the minutes of the Audit Committee. Haven't checked on the live broadcast viewing figures, but I'm sure they're wonderful. There are a couple of points I just wanted to raise with members. You will see at Appendix 2 the copy of our self-assessment, which for the most part shows full compliance or minor improvement. There is one area that calls for major improvement. I just wanted to briefly go over that. It relates to our decision as a council under our constitution to have a committee for audit, governance and standards versus the official guidance which calls for councils to have a committee that purely looks at audit. The council is satisfied that we are not wildly out of kilter with many of our peers around the country. The other that is marked as significant improvement is the inclusion of a lay co-opted independent member. I can assure Council that officers have progressed the recruitment process for this, and we very much hope to interview for the position on the committee before Christmas and fill that. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank officers for their hard work in supporting the committee, which I know everyone on the committee has valued. And finally to say we are working on training for committee members to up the skill set on the detail. This is a very, I confess, a dry subject area for many people, financials and governance. So we're working to make sure that we up the skill set of councillors sitting on the committee. And we are running briefing sessions ahead of most of the meetings of the committee, which of course all members of the council are welcome to attend should they wish to expand their own understanding of this area. So per the papers, I move that the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee Annual Report to Council of 23-24, which demonstrates how the committee has discharged its duties during 23-24, be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that seconded? Councillor Dubinsky, thank you. Is this agreed? Agreed. If I may add, I think it's an excellent report, and thank you for your explanations. They're very good. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 14, I'll call upon Councillor Mackay to move the recommendation of the Licensing Committee Gambling Act 2005 Statement of Licensing Policy 2025 to 2028. The recommendation is on page 29, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have in front of us a very weighty document, 50 pages plus.
That's right.
This was a consultation, one that we're required to do every 3 years. It got an enormous response of 5 responses, 4 of which came from councillors saying no comment. 1 was a typo. The 5th was a bingo hall saying you've got the wrong address. But this is, we need to have up-to-date licensing. So therefore I move that the papers on the Gambling Act 2005 Statement of Licensing Policies 2025 to 2028 be adopted by this council.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Is that seconded?
Councillor Nagy.
Councillor Nagy. Thank you, Councillor. Is that agreed? Thank you. Right. Agenda item 15, then we go on to. I've got my hearing aid in tonight and I can pick up lots going on, so please, thank you. Agenda item 15, I call upon Councillor Jeffrey to move the recommendation of the Cabinet Council Tax Reduction Scheme 2025 to 26. Recommendation is on page 82 of the report.
Thank you. This report comes every year. The scheme seems to be working well, so we're rolling it forward with updated figures in the grid based on the inflationary increase. So I therefore move that the council tax reduction scheme continues with the principles of the existing scheme and the percentage awards maximum award of 80% continue for 25-26 and the grid amounts be amended in line with the DWP annual increase of welfare benefits for 25-26.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Is that seconded? Oh, Councillor English, I see you down there. Thank you. Is that recommendation agreed? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you. Agenda item 16. I call upon Councillor Harper. On to the motions now, so the big points. I call upon Councillor Harper to move the motion relating to HMOs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sad to be raising this issue tonight. Almost 3 years ago, in February 2022, I brought a similar motion to this council asking for action. Now, 3 years later, nothing has happened. Well, it has. The situation is a lot worse. In that time, dozens and dozens of properties have been subdivided into HMOs and small flats across Fant. I am not against HMOs. HMO in a large property with proper off-street parking and amenity space can be a good house, can meet a good housing and also need. But that's not the experience in Fant. Fant is really suffering. Over the last 7 years, its nature as a mixed family neighbourhood has been eroded with overdevelopment, subdivision of houses and a continuing plague of inappropriate, cramped HMOs with their negative environmental and social impacts. For example, up until 7 years ago, Fant had a yearly electric turnover of 5%, typical for most wards. However, this slowly rose to 20%, but since 2022, it's running at an average of 20 to 30% a year. So the number of people moving out of the area is a third every year. And that's showing on the stress of the area. Long established and even new families to Fant feel under siege and they move. We are getting an increasingly transitant population due to the pressures caused by HMOs. Only today, we heard that Fant's lost its regular bus service from January due to the impacts of overdevelopment and roads. To quote New Venture, the bus operator, the situation in Fant has been greatly exacerbated in recent years by excessive curbside parking, which makes the passage of buses or any large vehicle very difficult, and it is surmised that this may be related to the parking needs of multiple vehicles for a single residence. The time for talk has gone. We need to act now. Over this year, the rate of HMO conversions is running at a minimum of 1 to 2 a month, and sometimes 1 a week. There is nothing local residents can do, as it is all done under permitted development. If action is not done now, it will be too late for much of Fant, and it will no longer be an area to bring up children and families. We need new parking restrictions, an HMO supplementary planning guidance, and an Article 4 direction now. For the sanity of the Fant community, we need to act now. Tomorrow will be too late, and I reserve my right of reply to the debate under Rule 15.9.1. Thank you.
Is there a second to that? Councillor Forecast?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's not massive more I can add to the powerful words that Councillor Harper just said. I do think it's important to stress that this motion isn't inherently anti-HMO, and we do recognise they provide a place for people to live, an important part of our housing stock, particularly when home ownership, an issue myself I am facing, is particularly hard to achieve. However, I grew up in the Fant area, living on Douglas Road and going to St Michael's School, and it does not take a genius to figure out that the infrastructure here, including school places, GP appointments, and particularly parking, is at breaking point. This motion will allow residents and councillors their rightful voice in the democratic process and stop the parking crisis. I'm very happy to support Councillor Harper, and I hope you will too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foulcross. In accordance with Council Procedure Rule 12.9.1, there will now be a debate on the motion, during which the motion may be amended or withdrawn. But I think I have Councillor English who wishes to speak. Okay.
There is clearly an issue, and I believe that I drew attention to this at a planning committee some time ago and made a reference at that point to the then cabinet member for planning, one Paul Cooper. I received no response. Now, I believe that there are solutions to this, but an Article 4 is clearly not a solution. We have had a number of planning applications that went to planning committee about HMOs, some of them in Fants, some of them in other places. The planning committee certainly had its democratic say, which resulted in the planning committee democratically refusing those applications without the benefit of any policy background to back it up, and being slightly undemocratically overturned by a planning inspector at appeal, and this happened a number of times. An Article 4 directive simply removes permitted development rights, as the motion itself concedes. It doesn't give you a planning policy background to actually deal with the problem. It just means that the planning committee gets the blame instead of the officers. Okay, that's a benefit, I suppose, in some ways. And of course, an Article 4 is extremely difficult to get. An Article 4 is based on an exception to a standard situation. And to achieve an Article 4 for an entire district of a borough is actually quite difficult. And if it is achieved, it can take 2 to 3 years to achieve, and may not be there for very long because it has to be renewed on a regular basis. Now, we have not, in fact, as a cabinet, been sitting around saying that we're not going to do anything about this. William Cornell has looked into whether or not an Article 4 could be progressed with to any benefit, and the answer is no. What we do need to do, and we are doing, is bringing forward supplementary planning guidance to actually address the planning issues and looking, as part of our review of on-street parking, at parking standards. The combination of doing those two things will give us a planning policy matrix which will enable us to actually determine those applications at officer level or planning committee level. And that is what we will need to do. Diverting the resources into a massive piece of work on Article 4 will simply delay that, and in fact may actually be an obstacle at a hearing into the DPD or SPD.
Spot on. Yeah. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Harwood, I think, next, then Councillor Coward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I'd just like to reassure that within, I think it was 2 days of the new administration being formed, there was a meeting of the relevant cabinet members with the chair and vice chair of the planning committee to discuss how we take this forward. And I can still remember going back even further than 2022, on the 9th of November 2021, when the old strategic planning and infrastructure committee discussed the HMO issue, and that debate was largely around Article 4. And the reason that I pick out that date of 2021 is when the National Planning Policy Framework was launched in 2012, it did provide for an ability for local authorities to identify conglomerations of HMOs where it has an impact on surrounding amenity. What happened in 2021 is the National Planning Policy Framework was republished, and the section that dealt with HMOs was removed. And with its removal, it straight away impacted local authorities' ability to control or use Article 4s for an overabundance of that use. So the outcome of the discussion, which occurred going back in the spring, was that it was believed that what we needed to do was to bring forward the quickest policy document, which is a supplementary planning document. If we went down the DPD route, it would probably take longer than we'll have a council to determine it, frankly. The SPD, and we have already a draft of that document, is being moved as quickly as we can through the local authority. However, we cannot do it with an SPD alone. There are elements around parking and there are elements around licensing which also have a role in this. So when we as a council discuss the SPD and discuss the approach going forward, I recommend that it is not through the Planning Policy Advisory Committee, that there should be a bespoke group which would actually come from across the policy advisory committees, because they all have different parts to play in coming up with a holistic, multifaceted response to some of the challenges which have been identified. So I understand what the motion says, but I actually think it's a slightly different approach would work. Thank you.
Councillor Callan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank Councillor Harper and Councillor Forecast for bringing this motion. As one of the county members for Mason Central, a lot of the issues that are raised with me in Fant and across that area are to do with parking, lines, and then obviously social impact elements as well that has been mentioned. So I sort of just would like to thank them for bringing the motion forward. We need to do something about HMOs. I agreed with Councillor Harper. I think he may have brought this originally with Councillor Pearl, my former colleague, and I supported it then and I support it now. So thank you for bringing the motion.
Nobody else. No, Councillor? No? Okay. Is there anybody else wishing to speak?
Millen.
Yes, I thought it was Councillor Millen. Councillor Higson, is it? Sorry, I was told. Okay.
Yep. Thank you. Good evening, Council. I'd just like to point out that the sort of average cost of a 2-bedroom family home that you would bring children up in Maidstone for private rented is between £1,400 and £1,500. So horrible as they are, HMOs do provide affordability for some of our residents. Thank you.
Okay, that's it. And now Councillor Miller. Sorry for the confusion.
Direct line.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 1 year ago, before I was even elected to represent the people of Fanton Oakwood Ward, I was here questioning the council as a resident on the lack of action on the harm caused by HMOs. And I was told that they were working on policy, not just for Fanton Oakwood, but across the borough. This motion only claims to address the postcode of ME168, which obviously I care a lot about as both a resident and a ward councillor. It would be ridiculous not to recognise that this is a wider problem than my area. It is already a growing problem in High Street, Bridge, Tovel and beyond. And Article 4 would push the problems somewhere else. Maybe to Marden, Staplehurst or Barming. I'm sure members agree with me that we do want stricter regulations for HMOs to protect both their residents and neighbours from the harms caused by bad developments. Article 4 is not the way to get this action, as I suspect many of you already know. Many of you among us were part of the almost unanimous vote from 3 years ago on this same motion. We have over half of that Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee sitting here today, 3 years after they resolved to begin the work to control HMOs. It is entirely disingenuous of the same people proposing the same motion that they had 3 years to enact sit here pretending they've played no part in this current nightmare my residents are facing. Mr. Mayor, our colleague, Councillor Forecast, claims he's surprised this isn't an immediate priority for us. I'm disgusted that after 3 years of inaction, he'd have the nerve to play this political football. The Green and Independent Alliance and Lib Dem coalition have been working for better policies to solve old problems, not dusting off ineffective motions from 3 years ago to run to the KM with. We need to safeguard the whole borough from oversaturation of HMOs and the harms that come with them. Without better planning policy, an Article 4 is pointless. In August, I called in a retrospective 8-bedroom HMO and struggled to get it refused due to the lack of policy. Policy we have been told for 3 years is being worked on. It is clear who didn't have this as a priority, and our residents won't be fooled by what people say to the KM. This isn't a game, this should not be for show. Uncontrolled HMOs are a real concern for residents of the whole borough, and we're sick of the same old symbolic gestures from those who look for column inches rather than effective action. My community elected me to stop empty promises and get meaningful results, and that action will not be limited to the boundaries of my postcode. For that reason, I feel unless appropriate amendments are made, I cannot support this as it stands. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I'm going to close the debate at this stage, if you don't mind, because we are getting very short of time. Hold on a second. Yep. Right, hold on. I'm going to read out the formal thing. At the conclusion of the debate, which we now have, in accordance with Procedure Rule 12.9.3, if there's no proposal to refer the matter directly to Cabinet, I will refer the matter to the relevant Policy Advisory Committee, having sought the advice from the officers. Can we agree to that, please? Agreed. Thank you. Right. Otherwise, we'll be going on all night. Okay, thank you, members. Members, please, can I have a bit of quiet? Thank you. Agenda item 17, I call upon Councillor Jenkins Baldock to move the motion relating to violence against women and girls.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is no coincidence that this motion is brought for your consideration at this time, given that we are in the period of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which began on the 25th of November, marked as International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Earlier this year, the National Police Chiefs Council presented the following figures to illustrate the epidemic of violence against women and girls, which I'll refer to as VAUG from here on in. Over 1 million VAUG-related crimes were recorded during 2022 to 2023, accounting for 20% of all police-recorded crime. Police-recorded VAUG-related crimes increased by 37% between 2018 and 2023. At least 1 in every 12 women will be a victim per year, with the exact number expected to be much higher. Sadly, Maidstone is not immune to this epidemic. Maidstone Borough Council has focused much of its visible VAUG efforts on domestic abuse, and that focus is not misplaced as such, as we know from very recent UN figures that home is the most dangerous place for women. However, we need to acknowledge that violence against women and girls, unfortunately, is multifaceted, which is why this motion proposes that as a council we develop a more comprehensive strategy to tackle it, following the lead of other councils who have adopted a more holistic approach. A new strategy could encompass all the really good activities that are currently undertaken, but should be broader in its scope. Parts of this motion aim to improve the personal safety of women and girls in the borough, because it cannot be enough for us to hand out rape alarms and hope for the best. There are lots of other actions we can take, and we have various tools at our disposal to assist us, particularly in terms of licensing, to ensure that women can enjoy a night out and get home safely.
Adopting a nighttime safety charter is about venues taking practical steps to make Maidstone safer for women at night and would provide venues with the opportunity to demonstrate that they take women's safety seriously. We also need to give consideration to women and girls' safety when undertaking town planning and ensure that there is adequate lighting and CCTV, for example. During daylight saving hours, many women and girls are forced to modify their behaviour and adjust their routines to stay safe. They have to navigate poorly lit areas or simply stay indoors. But it is not just for reasons for personal safety that more consideration should be given to women and girls when it comes to planning. Parks, play equipment and public spaces are designed by default for male users. It is high time to create spaces that are more inclusive for all. The aim of this motion is not just to treat the symptoms of violence against women and girls. By increasing awareness and looking to become a white ribbon accredited organisation, we can look to tackle the causes by challenging misogynistic attitudes, beliefs and behaviours which present veritable obstacles to gender equality and can lead some men to perpetrate sexual and gender-based violence. Plan International UK's recent State of Girls' Rights report reveals that girls in Maidstone fall short compared to their peers in other parts of the UK. They face big injustices in terms of health, educational outcomes, poverty, violence and harassment. The Minister for Women and Equality, Bridget Phillipson, recently made the point that women and girls can only take advantage of opportunities available to them if they are safe. Colleagues, I hope that you appreciate the need to do everything in our power to ensure that all women and girls in the borough have the opportunity to not merely survive, but to thrive. Thank you.
We need a seconder for this. Councillor Greenham? Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to add a few words before the motion is open to debate. An estimated 1 in 4 women experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. To put this into a more local context, this is like telling all the young women at my former school in Victor Grammar that just over 400 of them will have to face this during their lifetime. To say that in the borough from November 22 to October 23, there were 3,703 incidents of violence against women and girls, which is a 9% reduction from the previous year's figure of 4,053, is nothing to be proud of. This is still 3,703 incidents, far too many. While sexual violence, sexual harassment and domestic abuse remain a plague in our society, there will always be more work to do, there will always be conversations to have, and there will always be need for us as councillors to strive for better services for all our communities, to educate, enable them to speak out and report. I'd like to thank Councillor Jenkins Baldock for the work put into this motion, which I fully support and second. I hope that all the councillors can actively work together to ensure that women and girls feel safe and supported in our borough. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you both for this. I'm going to slightly jump the gun because we've been talking a long time, and I've got a list a mile long of speakers. I read this motion, and I think it's an excellent motion, and it's also something that's in the public interest as well. And I think we've heard Jess Phillips talk on this, and she talked very, very profoundly, I thought. I do think this is an excellent motion, and I want to just get the mood of the council rather than everybody speaking and all agreeing or saying, because I honestly think this is something that is so important that, and I'm really grateful that you raised it. I know you've done a lot of research, and I read it very carefully myself. So I'd just like to get the mood of the, because I'm minded, if you're happy, I will go straight to 12.9.3, and so it's taken through to the pack. Would everybody be happy with that? I'm only your humble mayor here, so yeah, agree. Okay, I will read it out formally, and then we'll go with that. Okay, at the conclusion of the debate, Well, we've had the debate. In accordance with Procedure Rule 12.9.3, if there's no proposal to refer the matter directly to the Cabinet, I will refer the matter to the relevant Policy Advisory Committee, having sought the advice from officers. Are we all agree with that? Agreed. Councillor Russell.
I was just going to say, shall we send it straight to Cabinet? I think we're also agreed on it that perhaps that it should go straight there.
We've already done it to
Okay.
PAC. Okay, we're on to right, agenda item 8. I can't reverse the decisions, so I've just read out what. Yeah, sorry. Okay, members, we're getting towards the end of the meeting, so I call upon the leader of the council to move that this report be noted, and this is the agenda item 18. 18, I mean, 18, not 19.
This is the urgent decisions. There were two the urgent decisions made, and I move that they are noted.
Are we all agreed to note it? Thank you. Oh, what's the question? Who's got a question? No. Right. Okay, now we come on to agenda item 19. And this is something that's going to... Can I have a bit of quiet, please? Thank you. This is a serious matter because we are about to award the honorary alderman to Cynthia Robertson. And I think sometimes you sit in this committee and there are some things you don't want to do, some things you do, but this is something that I think we all are very happy about. I'm personally delighted to be able to do this. So I just wanted to say that I will, Cynthia is someone I think who really deserves this. We've got two very worthy members on the honorary alderman shield, and I think Cynthia is a very worthy person to join both Fran Wilson and Wendy Hinder. Cynthia has been a councillor for 37 years, she was. She joined in 1982, which seems a long time ago now. She's done a variety of roles in the council, but above all, I think she's one of these people that has supported her group. I think sometimes you get the unsung heroes in this committee. We get people who say a lot, and some people don't say so much, but Cynthia is one of those persons I know worked very hard behind the scenes and made a major contribution to her group and also to the council. And I would like to thank Councillor English and Councillor Harwood for proposing this, because I think it is a very nice thing to do. And without more ado, I shall now present the certificates to Mrs. Cynthia Robertson, confirming her appointment as Honorary Alderman of Maidstone Borough Council. And if Cynthia's around, she's in the front row. I'm sorry, my sight is so poor these days, I just don't see distance. But Cynthia, please come forward.
Oh, okay. Right. You're right, Malcolm. Right. Okay. It's all been a bit overwhelming, to be honest, having this. I mean, little did I know that when I walked in this chamber in 1982, that I would actually be leaving it in 2024. It's a long time, and things were a lot different then. For instance, we didn't have computers, we didn't have emails. I remember if I wanted to look at a planning application, I had to actually go into the council offices and fish all the plans out and look at them and try and take them in. But I'm glad things have moved on anyway, and things are a lot easier for councillors now. I want to say that some of you know that my husband Malcolm Robertson, who was a councillor, died very suddenly in 2012. And when that happened, I was very grateful for the support of fellow councillors and officers during that difficult time, and I really value that. I think the best part of being a councillor for me is visiting individual residents and actually helping them out with their problems. And what I want to make a plea to the council to remember the people who can't easily work things digitally, and they will always need to actually speak to somebody on the phone to sort their problems out. And we really mustn't forget those people. Now, oh yes, something I'm very pleased about, looking at the makeup of the council now, I'm pleased to see that we've got a lot more women councillors and a lot more younger people on the council, because we really need the younger people to take over from us oldies. Anyway, I'll finish now and say thank you very much for this, which I shall treasure.